What's up, everybody? It's day 2 of the 12 days of Ace Miss. And today I'm going to be talking about some dream IPs. Now, these aren't the intellectual properties that I think would grow the game necessarily. And truth be told, if you had asked me this, a year ago or two, my answers probably would have been KOF 15 or just KOF in general and like Tekken 8. Truth be told, KOF 13 and all the ones before it are really my favorites, like 11, 12, I guess not 12, but anyways, we won't get too much into that. So back when it was just the fighting game franchise, I probably would have told you KOF needs to come back. And at one point, Cowboy Bebop and Yu Yu Hakusho were like at the top of my list. So I've done pretty good. We do have the roadmap for next year. So we do see, My Heroes coming back, Street Fighters getting more product. There's Godzilla and Fairy Tail. So we're not all anime, but not all fighting games either. So I've got 3 IPs here that I'd like to talk about that I think would be really cool. These are just, again, like my personal, for me opinion. I don't necessarily think that they would even, I'm not even necessarily basing these, on my favorite IPs, so there's things that I like more than these IPs, but they probably either already have a card game or there's very obvious reasons that we wouldn't get it. Like, for example, I would love to see like pro wrestling in Universe's system. I think I submitted pro wrestling cards to Nick Reagan's last design card contest. So I'd love to see stuff like that. I'd love to see like World of Warcraft translated into Universes, but those things just like aren't super realistic. So I tried to aim for things that even if they had a trading card game, it was like a long time ago. This may be a spoiler for one of these IPs on here, but without further ado, let's jump into it. So first up, we have Metabots! I think Metabots is super sick. It's for those who don't know, I should probably explain it a little bit. For those who don't know, Metabots is a 90s anime where you have a customizable robot and they have little discs or tokens or chips. I forget exactly what they called them in the anime, actually. I think they called them discs for some reason, but there's a lot of like 90s translation stuff. I watched the dub as a kid. But anyways, the point is you can give them different like little personality chips. They have like different little coins you can get and stuff like that. So they're very customizable. The show itself, of course, is about a kid who's like too poor to own a robot. So he buys like a really, really old model and then he has to find like the personality chip in a river or something, and then he goes on to be the greatest meta fighter. So it's kind of Pokemon-esque. The franchise launched, I believe, with Game Boy games that very much emulated the Pokemon JRPG, build a team, collect, battle, trade. It had 2 versions, you had to buy 2 versions to get all the robots or whatever. So there was a collectathon element, although in the show and stuff like that, you collect parts a lot of the time. So they have like an anti-battle system where if you beat the opposing robot, they have to give you like a head or arm or leg attachment or something like that. So the robots are somewhat customizable. They have different armaments. You can, give them a different layout, a different kit each time. So it has a lot of appeal that way. I've only played the video games a little bit on emulation and they didn't emulate very well. So I can't really tell you too much about the franchise overall, but I can tell you that for all of the 90s anime charm, Metabots really has it. So there's lots of different Metabot styles to pull designs from. They have, big clunky build outs. They've got cat bots. They've got insect bots. They've got, construction bots and stuff like that. So there's a lot of different styles and designs that they can pull from. There's not too many that are like super well known. It's pretty much a few like iconic ones from the anime that they'd almost certainly focus around. But in the grand scheme of things, there is lots of different meta bots you could make characters out of. The meta fighters, I think, would make really cool backups rather than characters themselves. I think if we did get this IP, you'd probably end up with the meta fighters as characters, and then you'd have the attacks that they play be what, where the Metabots are, and the Metabots might be backups. But I think it'd be much cooler if the Metabots were the character because that's what's doing the fighting. and then the backup is there to represent like your buddy or your pal. I think Digimon does that kind of like with the tamer cards, right? You can like put a tamer into play, and then you have like the kid who goes with all the Digimon that you're actually playing. I think that's a cooler system. It would be a great asset, tech, and weapon heavy set. Of course, they are robots, so tech would be involved a lot. The different customizable pieces and parts could be the assets, and weapons are, of course, how the things you're attaching to them. So definitely would play well with some of the most, I guess, commonly archetyped keywords. Like weapon is kind of almost always its thing, and then weapons and assets play so well together because when they put in a weapon in the game, it's almost always a weapon asset, right? So those things almost always go together, and it would fit perfectly with Metabots. They're customizable robots, so you can make for some really cool combos and designs. You could even, if you wanted to go like full out there with it, the Metabots could be the characters, and they could have skill tree style cards that start in play that you can swap out, so you can get like the full custom Robo sort of. Well, I guess that's a different IP, but you can get like the full experience of saying, I want my Meta B to be heavy duty, or I want my Meta B to be light and fast, right? Something like that would be cool. And then last but not least, a character that I would love to see inked on a card, and would make for some really cool stuff is Mr. Referee. He's one of the goats of 90s anime. If you guys never saw this show, uh, fights break out, like characters get into scuffles, and just like any other 90s pet battler anime, you've got to settle it with a fight. However, what's really cool about Metabots is they have like official rules, kind of like, gym battles in Pokemon. But you need someone to count the robots out and enforce the rules. And so no matter where they seem to be in the world, Mr. Referee shows up with his signature. It's time to row battle. And I don't know, man. Stuff like that really hits me as a kid. Obviously, Metabots stuck with me, and I would love to see it as an IP in universes. But for something a little more adult, something that probably plays with current themes a little bit better. And honestly, I don't know if more or less people would know about this. I think more people would probably be more familiar with Shadowrun. Shadowrun is kind of a tumultuous IP. I'll say this. Shadowrun is kind of a legacy nowadays, at least, where people who really, really like it have like specific gripes with it, but they stick with it. The last thing I saw someone talk about when they were talking about whether or not they like Shadowrun, they're like, well, I've played it for 30 years. Still don't know if I like it. So as a tabletop experience, and it has a ton of video games now too. It's actually been a usable IP more than I realized. I thought they kind of actually stopped putting out products a while ago, but there's like a whole sixth edition. I mean, that tells you how much they've done, right? 6 editions of the game for the tabletop. There's like newer video games than I realized. So they've been keeping up, printing stuff for the IP, but the setting is so cool and the world is so cool. I've only gotten to play the tabletop like once or twice. The games fell apart like immediately, but every time I was super in love with the character builds and the character ideas and themes that I had, characters who are mystical in nature fit into this setting. So the setting, for those who don't know, combines cyberpunk, fantasy, and urban themes. Shadowrun is set in a futuristic setting where magic returns to the world. There's essentially, I guess it probably depends on the setting, or it depends on the edition. The last version I read, I'll say this. The last version I read is magic returns to the world when a dragon reawakens, and it causes like a cataclysmic, earth shattering, earth sundering kind of event. And it changes the landscape in ways, and it reintroduces magic to the world in a way where people change, people become elves, the orcs return to the world. The world changes a lot because of that, both culturally and with advancements in magic comes advancements in technology and stuff like that. And it's typically set like 50 plus years in the future. Comedically, I think the first book ever printed was in like the 80s and it was set in like 2020, right? Or something like that. So I don't remember exactly which edition I was on. And, this is stuff that I don't ever really get to play the game too much, but I remember enjoying like the tabletop miniatures game that they had. I remember enjoying some of the older video games. They definitely had a stinker, the Xbox 360 or something. I think the game that was current, or the video game that was current when I was getting into Shadowrun was not good. I'll say that. But the setting has always really spoken to me. The idea that there are like dragons and trolls and orcs and, hybrid humans. I remember I got to design a character that had like an augmented robotic kangaroo tail because he would use heavy weapons and the tail would like brace him when the weapons knock him back. It's stuff like that. Like the weapons have heft to them to make it usable by like one person, or instead of being like mounted on a tank, you could augment your own body. So there's very cool stuff. I don't think we've ever had a futuristic setting for UVS. I don't think I can't like unless, Mortal Kombat or something is set in the future. Like, but there's never been like the high tech, like think of Kamigawa Neon Dynasty for Magic, right? Where they're like, now we've got lasers and hover bikes and stuff like that. Like, I guess Mega Man, Mega Man counts actually, right? 20XX sometime in the future, somewhere where there's okay, so Mega Man might count. But so yeah, a futuristic setting would be really, really cool. Expansive but familiar settings and lore. One of the things that I think that is cool about um Shadowrun is that it's, set in the real world. And that might make some complications for the game, but all the locations would probably be like buildings that are fake. If you're familiar with Cyberpunk Edge Runners, Shadowrun is like that, but with fantasy magic. That's probably oversimplifying it, but like, the same idea of you have to go on a run. I should probably explain what a shadow run is before I get to these bottom things here. So, a shadow run is typically something that a corporation will hire mercenaries for against other corporations. Spoiler: in the future, corporate sabotage is a big deal. I think that's probably just true right now. So they nailed it 40 years ago. So corporate sabotage is a thing. They hire, criminals who have to go and hack databases and, recover prototypes and things like that. Whatever it is, this is, think like high tech corporate super giant companies. Like think there's only 4 companies left and they're all controlled by the government. They basically are the government. And so they have denied ops. They have shadow runs that are not officially, disclosed. So these are the people, again, like Cyberpunk, very, very, very similar stuff. So you go on shadow runs to successfully heist or theft something, typically get some kind of information, recover things, whatever it is. Those are your missions, or shadow runs. Um, and so I think that the setting could be really cool and unique to UVS. The way that the game plays out, contacts are very important. So contacts can make for great backups. These are your your criminal, information brokers. These are people who might have special items or equipment that you need for a special job. Contacts in the underworld is like a very common thing in fantasy, right? So contacts would make for great backups, great non-combatant allies. Um, Augments make for great assets. A big part of the theme of the game is augmenting your body with technology, using technology, cybernetic implants, androids, stuff like that is a big part of the settings. I guess cyborgs are androids. So now I'll never know because it's fucking Dragon Ball Z. So augments can make for some really cool stuff. And then shadow runs could be schemes. They could be, we're going on this shadow run this turn, first form this action, do whatever it is. It could even have the scheme keyword because it's very much like a scheme. Or they could be their own keyword archetype. Shadow runs could be their own thing. I wouldn't be surprised to see an archetype that's like attacks that are like while you're on a shadow run, and that just means you have a shadow run in your card pool. or something like that, or you played the ability and it's like you're on a run for the turn. That's very MTG coded, but that's very similar to recent design, you know. So I could see something like that. And then most importantly is you can be a Minotaur wizard with laser eyes in Shadowrun. And if you didn't hear me the first time, yes, you can be a Minotaur wizard with laser eyes. Need I say more? That being said, there's one more IP that I think would be really good, and this is probably the most popular one. This is the most current one. This is the one I expect everyone pretty much to be familiar with. And if you're not familiar with it, you need to be. It's Frieren Beyond Journey's End, or Sosu no Frieren. I don't know. This is one of the only anime I've actually watched in subtitles. I actually think the dub voice actors are pretty rough. I don't know. I don't like Freeren's dub voice, so kill me. I think it's one of the most popular dubs too. Like it's one of the few that like even people I know who are subs only people are like the dub's not bad. But me personally, I'm a Sosu no Frieren guy, but I do think the dub is still really good. Again, everyone I know still likes it. It's not that bad. But I love Frieren. I think it's a really, really cool setting. It's one of the only anime that has really hooked me. It's one of the few things I've binged in years. You know, I haven't really sat down and like watched a TV show, you know, like episodic TV. You know, I've watched tons of documentary style stuff. You know, I watch a lot of daily challenge type things, you know, stuff that evolves over time and that you can kind of like catch replays of live sports, right? I'm like a sports watcher. So not so much of like a TV show watcher. I've been meaning to watch like Stranger Things for the entirety of its run now, and I just haven't sat down to do it. But Frieren is the only thing that I've put like multiple episodes into a day, you know, sit down. It's my only focus while I'm reading the subtitles. It's not a second monitor watch. It's that good. And I think it would be so good in UVS for so many reasons. The characters have well-defined personalities and combat archetypes. So going back to, you know, fantasy settings, going back to you know, how do you differentiate these characters? You know, one of the things that the first two ideas might have an issue with is that the characters probably operate a little similarly, or at least have like similar goals. And I think in Freerun the characters can operate very, very differently. While Fern and Freerun are both, you know, mages, they're both wizards. They have very different personalities, and even though Freerun teaches Fern, you know, they have their own approaches and things like that. So they'd probably be the most similar. And outside of that, I think all the other characters really bring their own spin to it. And that's really impressive for a show where magic is pretty open-ended. You know, the rules for magic are interesting, pretty loosely defined, and a lot of characters in the show are wizards. They still somehow have, you know, their own personality within it. They have their own styles, their own blends, you know, their own signature spells, things like that. So I think that it would actually fit super, super good. You know, it's a fantasy setting that plays extremely well with Critical Role, right? It's got basically all the same tabletop tropes. You know, it's essentially based on the same type of adventure and journey that you would base a show or a game of D&D like Critical Role on. So I think it would play incredibly well with Critical Role, you know, mage keyword, spell keyword, warriors, you've got champions. So there's a lot of stuff that they could do that I think would play really well. A party, you know, the characters are in a party, right? Like the Freerun's whole thing was they were in an adventuring party and now they're in another one with the successors, right, of her original party members. So very cool stuff you could do with like the party backup ideas. And I think the manga art is absolutely incredible. I looked into actually, you know, trying to read the manga. We've done a pretty good job of getting manga art for IPs instead of the anime art. And so if we did get manga Freerun, I don't think it would be it might even be better. It might be better than the anime, but the anime looks so good too. And then on top of that, there's so much meme card potential in Freerun. There's so many different instances where you could invoke some memes and and really speak to the audience of Freerin. And I think that that's really cool. And I would be really excited to see that stuff. But most of all, the number one reason I would love to see Freerin Beyond Journey's End in UVS is
Shadow Wizard Money Gang. We love casting spells. This song is sponsored by the Shadow Government. Legalize nuclear bombs.
Swag Messiah.